Welcome to the top 4 of the winners bracket of my grand finals tournament. It's going to be Berserk, probably the most likely person to win this tournament, against Adler. Now, I have not been notified of who won this fight, but I did only get the replays from Berserk. I do think they're favored, but you never know. Sometimes the players will try to throw me in for a loop to make sure that these matches aren't spoiled. Regardless, I think this should be fun. We have an Ice Witch with Tempest coming in from Adler with the Hawks of Miska. Some Zargard, very interesting. These were recently buffed in my balance mod. And weirdly enough, two Fimir, which is quite uncommon. You used to see double Fimir back in the days of Warhammer 2, but that was a double caster combo. This time, it's going to be a Noble with some pretty cool melee buffs. So this is a 26-second melee attack boost. It can be nice in a grind, and it looks like Kislev is going for that grind. So, should be pretty good. Maybe they'll be able to actually make these Marauders beat Zargard? No, absolutely not. But yeah, kind of a slightly unorthodox Norsca build, I gotta say. Double Ice Wolf chariots, by the way, were nerfed in a previous patch because they were a little too strong. Are they gonna get netted by the ambushers though? Apparently not. I thought the ambushers were totally gonna pin them and get them murdered. I believe they were in range too. This has a 100-meter range. Maybe they were slightly out of it. I'm not entirely sure. Wolfik did miss a boat on them, by the way. So a few missed opportunities on both sides, I feel. Though it could just be some slick positioning from both players. However, Norsca's getting shot up a little bit. Ice Wolves have taken a little bit of damage. Chariots are trying to skirmish. Berserk does very much so like their mobility playstyles. We're starting to see more summons. Of course, it's going to be cavalry for Kislev. Cavalry is very good because they can reinforce quickly. And they can actually participate in the fight immediately. Which, you know, in this case, it seems like Kislev, they're not going in for the fight. But cavalry can still be good just to round out your composition. For Berserk, it's actually the opposite. Okay, good example of the concept. So Berserk feels like there isn't going to be a fight soon. So they've gone for the slower Marauder champions, who should be able to actually group up with the main army before that actually begins. This will be generally stronger, as infantry are typically quite good in the grind compared to cavalry. Of course, without support, they'll die. But in general, this will help bulk up this formation to actually defeat the Zargard front line of Kislev. We're going to see a fairly nice pick over here too, with Malkoths hitting the cavalry to slow them down and deal a little bit of damage. Combined with the Ice Wolf slow, they become way slower than most of the units on the battlefield. And that's going to get them dead. Miska counterpunch though, but Berserk sees it and immediately dodges. Very nice play. This is good. This probably is going to embolden Berserk to actually stick around for this big melee fight. There's a little bit of a late Marauder champion engagement though, but even if they eventually get here, it's still quite good for Berserk, I gotta say. Killing off a whole Lancer, getting a ton of damage on the Lord too, going in for the killing blow. She is Hunter of Champions, which reduces her melee defense to 0. No wonder she took so much damage. And a very nice play so far. With the ambushers now getting pit shaded, they have used one of their pack traps. But it hasn't really amounted to much. In fact, I would say the Malkoths has probably done more than the pack trap so far, unless I missed something. And another cavalry's gonna bite the dust. Berserk taking a huge advantage in the early game with pretty cool Norsca build, using that Fimir Noble for just a little bit of extra punch on that Ice Witch. Very cool to see. Chariots get caught up in the infantry, and I think that's basically going to be a done deal for the Kislevites. I don't really see how they can come back from this. Because here's the problem. They just don't really have any leverage in this situation. It might look like, yeah, they still have a lot of units here, but their single entities are weaker, their infantry is weaker, and their mobility is also weaker. Berserk now has a lead on that front. So there's no real asymmetry to come back unless maybe they can make some plays. Ice Witch trying to get in here. But a Pit of Shades dropping on the Zargard is going to be a lot of value. Ice Witch does take out that Fimir Noble. They do have bonus versus large, by the way, but so does the Ice Witch, and they actually went down pretty quickly. That's going to balance out the single entity fightiness a little bit, but Wolfric still high up. He's still, yeah, he's still not gonna die anytime soon. And he's looking for that kill. Diving straight onto the Ice Witch. Misses an attack, though. But this is where the mobility advantage comes in. Ice Wolves are distracting and pinning down the Beowulfs so that the chariots can plow through the infantry. Brutal charge on these ambushers over here. Gonna be getting a lot of damage. Over in the distance, we're seeing some Cav summons trying to reinforce. But now that the Marauder champions are in, great weapon elite infantry of the Norskins, they're just gonna massacre the rest of the infantry over here. Very brutal, though. Second Miska could potentially shift things if it does cause a mass rout. This is what I like to call a Hail Mary play, though, as the setup is not there to actually rout off these units. And instead, it just does a little bit of damage as the Ice Witch gets absolutely clobbered. Ice Witch down. There she goes. Big charge over here on the ambushers. And now you can see there's nothing left for Kislev. GG. Well played. Very decisive game from Berserk. Let's take a look-see at the value. Caster got tons. Honestly, this mostly just came down to the single entity plays being so strong and a few cavalry picks. I will say the chariots too were pretty cool. I don't know if they were more valuable than other mobility, but at the end of the day, if you got the micro and enough units to kill off the cavalry, it doesn't really matter. Just strong plays all around. Now we go to game number 2. And Berserk is holding back no punches. They're going for glorious Slaanesh against the High Elves. Generally speaking, Slaanesh is very strong. On my balance mod that this tournament is played on, Slaanesh is nerfed. So their Slaangors, their Forsaken are 50 gold more expensive each. That's going to hold them back a little bit. But still very viable units, as you can see here. They're still being run. Just not spammed. So nice to see that we actually have some devoted Marauders over here with the little sword arms marching in to fight the High Elf composition. They got Sea Elemental, which is a little unorthodox these days. Still a very strong unit. Lots of anti-infantry armor piercing, insane melee defense. And against a faction that doesn't shoot very much, it's quite good. Obviously it has missile resist, but there's a common misconception that these things are strong against ranged, and they're absolutely not. They get clobbered by range attacks because they have no armor. For reference, a unit with 100 armor is probably more effective versus all but full armor piercing range shots. So Sea Elemental, not super great there, but like I said, no real range for Slaanesh outside of maybe some Marauder Horsemen. And the battle begins. First, Mega Charge on these Illyrian Reavers. A nice pick. Another Melkoth's cavalry combo again. Usually cavalry can't catch each other, but with a few spells, you can slow them down just enough to get the hits in. Miscast on the Melkoths. Not a miscast, but a miss. Only hitting the Fiends, where it doesn't really do a lot of damage. You can see, yeah, it really does almost nothing. It does about half a Spirit Leech's worth onto these Fiends. Very lackluster. And Slaanesh is just going to build up. So this is a common thing that you'll see in high-level Warhammer play. Both sides don't just immediately dive into each other. There's usually a little bit of feeling out between both sides. And Berserk is looking at this High Elf composition. They see how tightly they're playing, and they feel like, yeah, nah, that's a terrible decision. If I go in now, it's not a surefire win. So instead, they're just going to posture for positioning. Maybe go for the skirmish instead, since they have a little bit of a skirmisher advantage with all their Melkoth's casts. And actually getting some pretty big volleys on that Sea Elemental. Was that one volley from these Marauder Horsemen? That thing took a ton of damage. I guess they do have magic attacks. So this thing's basically naked outside of its base. Missile resist. And we're not seeing a big engagement. Just saving up for an Exalted Hero of Slaanesh. Buying time to get the optimal flanking with the cavalry. And High Elves don't really have a way to force the forces of Slaanesh here. Forcing, meaning that, ooh, these guys are actually going to use their charge defense versus everything. Very nice. Versus cavalry. But yeah, there's no real forcing tools. That would usually be artillery or high damage ranged to force the enemy army to attack into you. Which means while this army is very strong, it can't actually get out of the skirmish phase until Berserk decides that they want to be out of the skirmish phase. And all this posturing has taken, or at least started to take the middle point. This is going to make the High Elves want to push out a little bit further and maybe get out of position. But this is patience. This is some exquisite patience from Berserk. And another crazy volley too, by the way, on this Oceanids. These riders actually just straight up counter the elementals from the High Elves. It's quite brutal. And we're still seeing no engagement. Now, I don't think there needs to be an engagement from Berserk, as they can get capture this point. But the High Elves, they just need to shift down a little bit to secure it. You guys see another volley here on that Sea Elemental. Mega value. For one volley on such an expensive unit, that's quite nice. And once again, it's going to be a disengage. Now, there is a sacrifice to all this skirmishing. While value is being accrued, Berserk is falling behind on the tickets. You need 1,500 tickets to win. Each point gives 1 per second. And with a slight lead, if this continues forever, the High Elves are going to win. So what may happen is Berserk could just skirmish until the last possible moment and then go for a big strike. But potentially opportunities may reveal themselves before then. Fiends diving into the middle of combat. A little bit crazy over there. Yeah, Berserk's just going to disengage with them. These Oceanids have overextended though, which could work out very well. Some devoted Marauders get charged. And over here, it looks like cavalry's going to be diving into the forces of Slaanesh. This is generally good for the High Elves, I would say. As long as these Oceanids don't die, but it looks like they got the support from these Rangers. Yeah, this is looking a little sus. Let's take a look. I think most of it's going to come down to this fight. If the High Elves can properly hammer this Slaaneshi position and clear out all these units, they could win. Though I will say those Fiends are very good in the grind. Soporific Musk, decreasing the melee stats of this cavalry to basically nothing. And over on the far side, these Riders are still getting a lot of value. Good bit of shades too on the Storm Riders. Shutting down the High Elf ranged so that this just becomes a melee grind where Slaanesh can outmaneuver them. And we are seeing some routes over here. Meanwhile, on this side, despite being a little bit of a nice surround, the Fiends are just a little bit too much to actually kill in melee. And that's just kind of the Slaanesh flex. Not a lot of other factions can just throw their mobility into the back line and actually survive. I know these are Reavers, but getting charged by cavalry, still getting charged by cavalry. And we're seeing a huge collapse of the High Elf position. A little bit of, I guess, High Elves just undercommitted over here. And that got him caught. Maybe Teclis needed a net. Maybe they needed a little bit more support. I will say the Sea Elemental has been having a very hard time getting value too. With these big single entities, You just don't really have a lot of money elsewhere in your build, and they genuinely take a long time to get value. Maybe if they were here killing off fiends, it'd be a different story, but it's not exactly a fiend killer either. And indeed, the cavalry get completely swarmed over here. The reverse mop-up from the Slaaneshi side. They're very mobile, so they don't mind reinforcing even very far distances compared to the opponent. Especially on a map like this with so many trees, High Elves are actually slowed down. And there's not going to be much left. Yeah, look at that. Oceanids getting murdered. I would love to see the value on those riders too. I believe they did get routed off. But, no, there they are. Slaanesh never routes. Let's take a look. Holy moly, yeah. Yeah, that's almost 2,000 value. They've paid for themselves more than double at this point. And Slaanesh is just taking massive engagements everywhere. I don't think they lost a single engagement on all fronts. And that is due to their superior mobility. And of course the High Elves not being able to leverage this guy. Pit of Shades drops, killing off the Silver Helms too. Absolutely brutal. And when you are this behind against Slaanesh, you're basically screwed. The army abilities will be kicking in at this point. And with those, anytime you summon a unit, they can basically just net them down. And you'll just keep losing fights. You kind of need a very decisive early game engagement versus Slaanesh. Still though, valiant effort from the High Elves. They're staying in the fight despite having very low chances of winning. Sea Elemental still has not paid for itself, despite actually getting into a few tussles. It's just a very long, grindy unit. And yeah, that's going to be it. Meanwhile, Slaanesh just taking the very decisive fight. Berserk moves on to the top two. Will they be where they will be facing Maximilian Air. Very exciting indeed. And if we look at the values of these units, yeah, crazy valuable casting. We got the Fiends who were able to backfield dive and get a ton of value. And some cool Fury play too. Berserk does like their mobility Fury options, the Furies, the dogs. Still running Forsaken and Slongors, still getting lots of value with them. And yeah, I don't think anything really did well for the High Elf side. I guess the Skirmishers did not bad. But if you are going to be stuck in the skirmish phase, you probably want a few more of these Reavers. Actually, look at how thin this army is too. Only 3 Rangers to start. Because they also went for a Mage Techless combo. So like, if you just look at the actual main army for the Elves, it's 3 units of infantry, 2 cav, 2 skirmishers. Against 4 units of infantry, 4 units of cav, and a Fury. Wait, no, wrong army. My bad. No, even more. 7 units of infantry, 2 cavalry, 1 skirmisher. So they were going to be overwhelmed almost no matter what. GG.